They get rid of all the intermediate management. They clean it down. They reduce the cost. They make it indebted. Right, highly indebted, and the company crashes 6 months or a year later, but they've made their money.
And that's the kind of experience we want to put in the White House. That's what he's proud of. If that's his economic experience, contrasting with President Obama, I'm looking forward to a general election.
That's where I think the other Republican candidates have missed on Romney. They're afraid to say he's outsourced. That's what he has done.
He's outsourced.
He has shipped these jobs to other countries.
He's deliberately bankrupted companies, dismantled them, shipped jobs overseas, fired people for profit. I mean, even one of his partners, Ed, remember, one of his partners said, I never thought of what we did as job creation. Our primary job was to make money for our investors.
Stockholders, yeah.
Chris, this brings us to a South Carolina problem for Romney. South Carolina lived on textiles, as you know, for many years. They lost the textile industry.
Because they stole it from New England.
Well, look, I mean, probably long term, there was no real way to compete with India on textiles, especially with labor costs and all of that. I had a great half hour yesterday, best half hour of the weekend on the phone with Senator Fritz Hollings, 90 years old.
Wow, good for you.
In South Carolina. He tells me Romney's going to come in there, Romney's going to win, but they won't. But the Republicans will not be talking about what South Carolina wants to hear about. But he does think it's too late for anyone to make a move in South Carolina against Romney, and that Romney is going to pull it off.
And that has had the history of picking the Republican nominee. Let me ask you about a tone we heard tonight. Huntsman. Interesting guy. I've been actually curious about why he's running in this particular party, because the Republican Party of 2012 is not a Huntsman party. He's more of a party of Bill Scranton or even Rockefeller. But he said something tonight that I think my wife has just noticed. I'm sure my kids are going to notice. He came back at Romney, where Romney scolded him for having served a Democratic president, as our ambassador, America's ambassador to China. Given his tremendous background as a Mormon missionary over there, his language skills, his unique ability to serve our country, and he knocked him for that. In fact, he scolded him. And he came back and said, he was talking to David Gregory, the moderator, this nation is divided, David, because of attitudes like that. The audience, which is very partisan, as you know here, they're picked for that reason. Tremendous round of reaction to that. So even among partisan Republicans who are here as activists, they want to hear the tone of unity. How does President Obama, at the same time he has to bring down a hard-charging opponent, a challenger, who's going to come at him hammer and tongue, how is he going to do that at the same time, unite the country, and come back into office as a second-termer with a united country, not a country of political wreckage? How's he do it?
Well, Mitt Romney is doing a good job for him. I mean, the other thing that was telling in the debate is when he talked about his father's advice that you should never run for office if you really need the job to pay your mortgage. Really? So that means only wealthy people should run for office? I mean, he was glad that Ted Kennedy had to take a second mortgage out on his house, and that was his accomplishment in running against him. Corporations are people. We shouldn't do anything to help people stay in their homes.
Okay, you're making a good ideological point now, but back to my question. You're very good at it. That's why you're the chairwoman of the party. But how do you maintain presidential tone? This election will be held. There will be a winner. We've been through this. I've been through this about 50 times, I think. This cycle of the other guy's no damn good, I'm great, I'm super. You go back and he hates your guts. More bitterness, more division. It adds up. It accumulates. Every cycle gets worse. How does this president do something he hasn't done yet? Unite.
Time and again, President Obama has attempted. He's been the grown-up in the room. He's been the leader and tried to get the Republicans to come to the table and work with him and compromise. They've refused because they care about just one job, his, and Democrats care about American jobs under President Obama.
The audience was applauding government service. They were applauding serving the country. Yeah. And there were a couple of other moments about serving the country that Huntsman won big time with this audience. They were asked last night, if you weren't doing this tonight, what would you be doing instead? And, you know, they came up with the silly answers. I'd be shooting guns. Huntsman's answer was, I'd be on the phone with my two sons serving in the Navy, which is the only active family claim of military service on that panel, the only one.
And a panel of hawks.
And last night, when the local reporter brought up the question of your own personal military service, which none of them have, except for Perry, who has a minor service, not in combat. Given that you don't have military service, how will you be commander-in-chief and order people into battle? And this dialogue went on, talking about why Newt talking about why he wasn't in Vietnam serving, while Mitt Romney stands silently and and no one raises the question about him spending the Vietnam War in France with a string of deferments.
Yes, well, I think it'll come up in the general because people are going to raise it and commentators are going to raise. Thank you, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz of Florida. We're all going to be watching Florida at the end of this little shebang in South Carolina, by the way. That's the big state. And it actually is a big, diverse state, as we've learned during the late, great recount. We learned how diverse you are. Right. Lawrence O'Donnell, my colleague, thank you, Ed Schultz. I want to thank them. But also, this is MSNBC's coverage of the Republican presidential candidates debate, the very exciting electric debate, I must say, this morning up here in Manchester, New Hampshire, just 2 days before the primary. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to Manchester and MSNBC's coverage of the Republican presidential candidates debate this morning. We're joined by John Heilman, National Affairs Editor for New York Magazine and an MSNBC political analyst, and Jennifer Donahue, a real expert up here, a fellow at the Eisenhower Institute and a Huffington Post contributor. I want to start with Jennifer because you just are so grounded up here. These polls, what do they tell us? Because I think we're all curious about who we figure Romney's holding strong to high 30s, maybe low 40s still, but probably high 30s, maybe down to 35. But the big cue for all of us, and the headline I think out of here, is who's coming in second. Yeah. Can anybody beat Ron Paul for that second spot as you see the trends?
If anybody can, it's John Huntsman. He's coming across as authentic. He's coming across as someone who's an outsider. He's coming across as someone who, even though doesn't have that much charisma, does have the maverick tendencies. He's been here 160 plus times. He's someone who can erode Romney's authenticity, because when Romney runs super PAC ads and looks a bit like a snake for disowning them, Huntsman can come in and say, I'm not doing that. I'm on the ground. I'm doing the town hall meetings. We're also looking at the number of undecided voters right now. Those numbers are at 15, a little bit up from 15%. I think it could be double that. I think you're going to see Romney's vote erode.
And they'll go to the hot guy, the new guy.
I think they'll go to the new guy.
Yeah, let me ask you about that whole thing about Huntsman. If Huntsman wins up here, he comes in second, which we call a win, I think, at this point. What I find refreshing about it, being in the business of political argument so much of my life, that he was able to score tonight with that wonderful retort to Romney, the front runner, saying Romney scolded him for having taken a position as ambassador to China under a Democratic president. He said, this nation is divided because of attitudes like that. Yep. It was chilling. Yep. It was a line almost right out of the McCarthy hearings. Yep. One of those great retorts.
Yep. And true. And true. Look, I watch the debate as you did, Chris, but I'm also always watching my email as I'm looking at these debates, and I'm seeing what the campaigns are sending me in terms of their retorts and their opposition research. My inbox throughout this entire debate was flooded by stuff from the Paul campaign attacking John Huntsman. Never had that before in any debate that I've been at every debate.
And
that tells me that the Paul people are really concerned that John Huntsman is rising and that he poses a threat to Paul standing in second place. There have been some polls that have shown him rising faster, but they're all showing him rising.
And why would he be rising? Because it's the same kind of rejectionist attitude people would have in New Hampshire, in the state of live free or die, which is don't give me your bull, your baloney. I want to say something.
Protest vote. It's people saying, you know what? I'm an independent voter. I might even be a Democrat who's registered as an independent. They make up over 1/3 of the electorate in New Hampshire. These are the people carrying signs at Paul rallies. These are the people who are showing up for Huntsman. These are the people who know Romney and have moved out of Massachusetts.
Okay. It's why we love New Hampshire, guys. I want to cue you up here, tee you up. It's why we love New Hampshire. It's the state where Ike came out of nowhere. It's the state where Jack Kennedy won, but it's also the state where Gene McCarthy showed up Lyndon Johnson. It's the state where George McGovern showed up Muskie. It's the state where people like Reagan come back from the dead. It's a state where Henry Cabot Lodge can win. There's a thrill to this state because it just does it. It just sticks it in the eye of the big shots in the media and says, you think what's going on? What's going on? Yes. I got something for you.
And that's an awesome history, but the one you left out. Think about 2008, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. They say people...
I'm sorry. I owe it to her. That was a brilliant upset right in the face of a huge victory in Iowa.
And they always say here, New Hampshire doesn't pay attention to Iowa. New Hampshire doesn't pay attention to Iowa. New Hampshire pays attention to Iowa. It just doesn't follow Iowa. And in fact, what it often does is it looks at what happened in Iowa and says, we don't want to listen to those guys.
Like
we want to reject that.
Let's show people who missed it earlier today. Listen to this exchange we're talking about, I believe, between John Huntsman, who served as ambassador to China under President Obama, but also for the American people, and Mitt Romney.
First of all, with respect to Governor Romney, you know, there are a lot of people who were tuning in this morning, and I'm sure they're terribly confused after watching all of this political spin up here. I was criticized last night by Governor Romney for putting my country first. And I just want to remind the people here in New Hampshire and throughout the United States that I think he criticized me while he was out raising money for serving my country in China. Yes, under a Democrat, like my two sons are doing in the United States Navy.
I just think it's most likely that the person who should represent our party running against President Obama is not someone who called him a remarkable leader and went to be his ambassador in China.
This nation is divided, David, because of attitudes like that.
Stirring.
Good. It's a good New Hampshire moment. You noticed putting my country first. John McCain reference there, the McCain theme that he ran on in 2008, very effective in New Hampshire. This analogy between his service in the Obama administration, being called to an important post to represent the country in China, strategic concerns, economic concerns, and the analogy with that to the military service. That's something that the Huntsman campaign has wanted to do all year long. They've been waiting for the moment to make that argument, and Romney, by attacking him last night, gave Huntsman away in a very high-profile setting to drive that argument they've wanted to do since he got in the race in June.
By the way, that's called an attack from a defensive position in politics, and it works.
And that's why the White House is probably scared of John Huntsman.
Yeah, let the other guy take the cheap shot at you, and you come back, and everybody roots for you. There you go again, Mr. President.
Exactly.
It works. Thank you, John Heilman. What a pro. What a pro. And you reminded me of Hillary Clinton's amazing upset here just this past time. Jennifer Donahue, an expert on these environs. Coming back with more from Manchester. You're watching Hardball. I'm sorry, you're watching MSNBC's coverage of the Republican presidential candidates debate. Same difference. Just 2 days before the New Hampshire primary. Back with our coverage of the Republican presidential candidates debate this morning up here in Manchester, and we're live as well from the state just 2 days before the New Hampshire primary. David Paleologos is the director of the Suffolk University Political Research Center. David, it's great to have you on. We have become studentin of you the last couple of days. You're polling. Now, what we want to know about is movement the last couple of days. So can you project who's likely to really show us something Tuesday night here?
The only candidate that's gaining is Huntsman right now. Romney has dropped off 8 points in the last 4 days, from 43 to now today 35. And so Huntsman is really the only candidate that has momentum. Earlier in the week, Santorum had 4 consecutive days up. He went from +3. He went from 3% to 11. Now he's back down to 8. So he's kind of
he's had a difficult time on this stuff.
Yes.
Let's talk about Huntsman, who I believe just did a tremendous turn this morning. Yes. Are there moderate Republicans who may be roused by his call for moderation and better comedy this morning?
Well, he has momentum, and he also has standing among what they call undeclared voters or independents. He's getting 17% of independent voters. The problem Huntsman has is the flip side. On registered Republicans, he's only getting 7%.
What about the 15% undecided? What are undecided voters right now? Who are they?
Well, they're moderates. Only 1/4 of them align themselves with the Tea Party, so they're virgin territory for somebody like Huntsman who has momentum.
In the past up here, what has been the closing game for the voters? What do they tend to do at the end? Do they look for the surprise? Does New Hampshire like to shock the country? I looked at the history. You guys make news up here because you're the granite state, the live free or die state. You look like you like to say, you think you know what's going on? Listen.
There are some similarities and differences. I mean, what Santorum did in Iowa is kind of what Huntsman is doing here in New Hampshire. But you're right. New Hampshire does like to play contrarian, and they've done so with Santorum.
Okay, we're going to be following you. We're going to follow you in Florida when we get down to that really big state. Thank you, David Paleologos, up there. Among the great moments of this morning's debate was this shot by Newt Gingrich at Mitt Romney. Let's listen.
But I realize the red light doesn't mean anything to you because you're the front runner. But can we drop a little bit of the pious baloney? Just level with the American people. You've been running for at least since the 1990s.
Let's bring in U.S. Congressman Bob Walker. He's a Gingrich supporter and longtime ally. Congressman, this is the old Newt that we watched on the floor all those years, the man in the colloquy who could respond to anything with a ripping retort. There he is. I don't think pious baloney was on his mind, but it certainly came to mind. What do you make of the Newt we saw today, ripping the scab off, if you will, this notion that Mitt Romney is some sort of citizen businessman who has only occasionally shown interest in public office?
Well, I think what we saw today was that Newt is strongly contending for this nomination, and that what was clear